Previously, we looked at arguments and learned how to identify accurately the component parts of arguments, premises, and conclusions. In this presentation, we're going to continue that conversation and look at a different dimension of arguments. We're going to look at incomplete arguments, or enthymemes. An enthymeme is another name for an incomplete argument. Many of the arguments we encounter in everyday life are incomplete, and so therefore our ability to determine the missing information, whether it's a premise or the conclusion of the argument, is going to be very important for us to be able to evaluate arguments in general. Since so many arguments are incomplete, we have to do a lot of work to make the argument complete before we can begin to evaluate it. So let's do a quick review here of the component parts of an argument. We know that an argument is a set of statements, and those statements are intended to provide evidence for another statement. So the statements that are providing the evidence or the reasons are the premises, and the claim or the statement that is being supported by those reasons, we call that the conclusion. And we learned that an argument must have at least one premise and a conclusion to be a minimally complete argument, although many arguments will have more than one premise. That's not unusual. There is no upper limit to the number of premises you can have. And an argument can have one and must have only one conclusion. So, at least one premise and at most one conclusion. These are the component parts of a minimally complete argument. Oftentimes, the arguments we encounter in everyday life are not complete. And this is generally not a problem because we're really good at filling in missing information. However, in some situations, precision of expression and exactness are very important. We actually have to know exactly what the person is arguing. And in these kinds of cases, an incomplete argument can cause serious problems because an incomplete argument is easily misunderstood. Here are a couple of examples of enthymemes. At a press conference, the president indicated that our enemies were preparing for attack and they have many powerful weapons. Now in this argument, the conclusion is missing. It's an enthymeme because we're given two premises. We're told our enemies are preparing for attack and they have many powerful weapons. But what are we to conclude from this? What is the conclusion of this argument? Is this an argument for going to war? Is this an argument for launching diplomatic proceedings? It could be an argument for many, many different conclusions, but we don't know what the conclusion is. And this is the kind of case of obviously a very serious one where you want to know what the conclusion is because it could affect millions of people. So therefore, leaving the conclusion out is, in this kind of example, a dangerous situation. Now, a less dangerous situation involves buying a TV. Here's an enthymeme where a premise is missing. You should buy a new TV because TVs are on sale. Well, we know that because is a premise indicator word. So the idea that TVs are on sale is one of the reasons we're given why we should buy a new TV. But notice we're not given enough reason to buy a new TV. Yes, it's true they're on sale, but so what? We need even more information to complete the set of reasons that would justify that conclusion. So we do have an argument here, but it's an incomplete argument because we have an incomplete chain of information. It's insufficient to support the conclusion that is given that we should buy a new TV. And as I've already said, when you have an incomplete argument, you're dealing with what we call an enthymeme. Okay, an incomplete argument is an enthymeme. Now you might be asking yourself, well, why are we studying enthymemes? If they're incomplete arguments, then on the face of it, they're not very good arguments because they're lacking either evidence or they fail to draw a conclusion, and that would be correct. However, by studying enthymemes and being able to better understand how arguments function, that can help us to make better and more complete arguments ourselves. If we can look at an argument and say, oh, there's an incomplete chain of evidence there, that indicates that we understand the role of evidence in an argument. Or if we look at an argument and say they have failed to state their conclusion, once again what that demonstrates is you've mastered the skill of analyzing an argument into its component parts, and you can recognize that a key component part is missing. So studying enthymemes helps to reinforce our initial skill of argument analysis. As I've already implied, enthymemes or incomplete arguments can occur in two separate ways. You either have a missing premise. You might have a premise, as in the TV example I gave in a previous slide, but you don't have a complete chain of information that leads from all of the premises to the conclusion. One of the things that studying enthymemes helps us to see is that the evidence in an argument is sort of like a chain of information where all the links have to be present and lead to the conclusion for the argument to be successful. If one of those links is missing, then you cannot get from the premise or the premises you're given to the conclusion. You have to fill in that missing gap. Similarly, an argument can have a missing conclusion. This is very common, actually, because oftentimes people making arguments feel that perhaps their conclusion is so obvious it might be insulting to the person hearing it to spell it out for them. And that might be the case sometimes in certain innocuous situations. However, if you don't state your conclusion, then you run the risk that the person hearing your argument draws the wrong conclusion, and you lose control of your argument. And so since we want to be in control of the information that we are presenting, it is best to state your conclusion and therefore have a complete argument with all the pieces in place. So an enthymeme is not a very complicated idea, and this is not going to be a very elaborate discussion. An argument must have a premise at least, leading or supporting a conclusion. If it's missing one of those, it's not a complete argument. If it's missing a necessary premise, then you don't have a complete chain of evidence. If it's missing the conclusion, then you have a conclusion that isn't there, and that's a key component part of the argument. So the argument can be incomplete in one or the other of these ways. And what I'm going to focus on in the remainder of this presentation are some examples and some tips you can follow to help you identify these missing pieces of information more completely and more accurately. Just one last final note here. You can't be missing both. You can't be missing the conclusion and a necessary premise, because then you've basically got virtually nothing, right? So you have to have at least the bare bones of an argument for the argument to be incomplete. There is one very important point that I do want to emphasize before we go on to the examples, and that is that an argument is a connected chain of reasoning. The evidence or the information that is being presented in support of the conclusion is not just some random collection of statements. Rather, these statements are working together. They reinforce each other and they reinforce the conclusion. That's why they're able to provide evidence. And so, if a key piece of this link or chain of information is missing, then the argument cannot be successful because it's incomplete. And by definition, an incomplete argument is not a successful argument. This doesn't mean it's a bad argument necessarily. It means it's missing important information. When we're evaluating arguments which are incomplete, we simply can't dismiss them because they're incomplete, but it places upon us an added burden that we have to fill in the missing information. If someone doesn't state their conclusion, for example, well, that puts on us the burden to figure out what they're actually arguing for. Now, that's a problem, as I mentioned earlier, because we may not conclude what they want us to conclude, or they may not conclude what we're trying to conclude if we leave our argument unstated. So we have to keep in mind that when our conclusions are unclear or when our premises are gappy and not complete, then we run the risk of not being understood. So now that we've covered some of the theoretical ideas surrounding incomplete arguments, it's time to look at a few brief examples to help reinforce the ideas I'm trying to teach you here. So here is an example of an enthymeme, and your job is to think about what's missing from this enthymeme. All genetically modified plants can be patented, and pesticide-resistant wheat is genetically modified. So the question is, what's missing here? And I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about that. All right, so did you determine what's missing here? The conclusion is missing. All genetically modified plants can be patented, and pesticide-resistant wheat is genetically modified, so the conclusion would go, pesticide-resistant wheat can be patented. The conclusion links together the two premises and draws the information out. So how did I know that the conclusion was missing here? Well, one thing I noticed is that the argument that was given, the incomplete argument that was given, presented two statements linked together with a conjunction. In this case, the word is and. The one statement is all genetically modified plants can be patented, and there's the conjunction, pesticide-resistant wheat is genetically modified. So first of all, you can look at this argument and use the techniques we've already developed. Look for conclusion indicator words. Look for premise indicator words. If you find a conclusion indicator, then you know that there's a conclusion there, and if it's an enthymeme, then a premise must be what's missing. In this case, we don't have any conclusion indicators, and it doesn't look as though either one of these statements is the conclusion, but we know that they're linked together with a conjunction, and. This is important. Since these are linked together, these two statements, by the word and, that implies that they're performing the same function in the argument that's presented. Now follow me here. This is important. If these two statements are both performing the same function in the argument, then we know that neither of them is the conclusion. Why? Because there are two of them. And since an argument can only have one conclusion, we know that these statements are not functioning as the conclusion. Since there are two of them, they must be premises. And if they're both premises, then what's missing is the conclusion. So my tip for looking for figuring out what's wrong with a given argument is if you see a conjunction like this, like and, linking together two statements, that implies they're functioning similarly, and therefore that implies what you're looking for is the conclusion and not another premise. Okay, so here's another example. You want a safe and reliable car, so you should buy a Honda. What's missing here? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it, and then we'll analyze this example. All right, so hopefully you have an answer. Let's look at this one again. You want a safe and reliable car, so you should buy a Honda. Now, applying what we've learned before, we recognize the word so functioning as a conclusion indicator. So that tells us that this particular argument has a conclusion, that you should buy a Honda. Therefore, by deduction, we realize that we're missing a premise. You want a safe and reliable car, but that's not enough to get us to the conclusion that we should buy a Honda without additional information. We're missing a key premise. And so the idea is that we have to fill in that gap of information. You want a safe and reliable car, we need another piece of information, add those together, and that would lead to the conclusion. If we supply the missing premise, Hondas are safe and reliable, then that would be enough to complete this argument. So the complete chain of ideas would be, you want a safe and reliable car, Hondas are safe and reliable, therefore or so you should buy a Honda. Now we have a nice little complete argument with a complete chain of information. One thing you should note when you're called upon to supply the missing premise or the missing conclusion, don't worry so much about seeking an exact formulation. The key idea here is the information that is conveyed, not the exact same chain of words that I'm giving you as my examples. You might have come up with, for a safe and reliable car, you want a safe and reliable car. Well, Hondas are known to be safe and reliable, therefore you should buy a Honda. That would work just as well. It doesn't have to be the exact set of words I'm giving you, but something that conveys the idea that links the thoughts together in the premises. So I'm sure you've got the idea now. Let's just do a couple more examples to reinforce this. Larry Underwood is a talented singer. After all, he's won several Grammy Awards. So take a few seconds, try to figure out what's missing here. Okay, so Larry Underwood is a talented singer. After all, he's won several Grammy Awards. When we look at this potential argument, we notice there are no indicator words. And when we don't find any indicator words, our initial hypothesis is that the conclusion is likely to be the first statement. In this case, the first statement is, Larry Underwood is a talented singer. Now, if that is the conclusion, the remaining statement or statements should give us a reason to think that. Why should we think that Larry Underwood is a talented singer? Well, the next statement says he's won several Grammy Awards. So Larry Underwood, having won several Grammy Awards, is presented as evidence that he's a talented singer. But we need more information. We need an idea that links together winning a Grammy with being talented. And that's the missing premise we seek. Talented singers win Grammy Awards, or something along those lines. When we put all these ideas together, then we have a complete argument. Larry Underwood is a talented singer. After all, he's won several Grammy Awards, and talented singers win Grammy Awards. So you can see, therefore, it would follow that he is a talented singer. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing the idea of an argument as a linked, connected chain of ideas. And this is just reinforcing the basic ideas we've learned about what are the component parts of an argument. The better you get at identifying what's missing, that means you're getting better at identifying the parts of an argument. All right, one final example. The corporate income tax should be abolished because it encourages waste and high prices. What are we missing here? A premise or the conclusion? The corporate income tax should be abolished because it encourages waste and high prices. Well, we look for conclusion indicator words and we don't find any. So then we look for premise indicator words, and we do find one here. We find the word because. So we know that the statement it, meaning corporate income tax, encourages waste and high prices is a reason. And that implies that it's a reason for the first statement that the corporate income tax should be abolished. So that would be the conclusion. So we have a conclusion and we have a premise. So therefore we know that what we're missing here is another premise. Something along the lines of anything that encourages waste and high prices should be abolished. Now let's put the whole thing together. Anything that encourages waste and high prices should be abolished. The corporate income tax encourages waste and high prices, therefore the corporate income tax should be abolished. When we supply the missing information and slightly reorganize the argument, you can see very clearly it's a chain of connected ideas. So at this point, determining what's missing should be fairly elementary. You're using the ideas we've already established for identifying the parts of an argument. That helps you to figure out what's missing, and then you have to think about how you would supply that missing information. I'm hoping that by now this is fairly simple for you. If you find, however, that you're not understanding this exercise, that's an indication that you need to go backwards before you go forwards. That implies that you don't fully have a sound understanding of what an argument is, and it might be a good idea to go back to the presentation on what is an argument, reinforce and practice those ideas, and then come back here, and hopefully if you go through it again, it should be fairly simple to figure out what's going on with these incomplete or incomplete arguments or enthymemes. This material often requires reinforcement. There's nothing wrong with going back and reviewing, and that's the nice thing about an online class, is that this lecture will be there forever, so you can review it over and over again, and I know you're dying to do that, so I'm going to let you go ahead and finish up this lecture and get on to the exercises. All right, so now it's time to practice, and in the module I have some practice exercises on enthymemes or incomplete arguments that you should work through. And I've also provided an answer key. After you've finished the exercises, you can check your results. Keep in mind that if you're supplying a missing conclusion or a missing premise, your answer does not have to be literally word for word the suggested answer given in the answer key. It should be sufficient if it merely expresses the same basic idea. One thing I do want to mention, because I've gotten several questions about this, is that you're not going to be turning in these practice exercises. My assumption is that since you're in this class, you want to learn. And if you want to learn, you will do the exercises, and there's no need for me, therefore, to collect them. I'll figure out whether or not you've mastered the skills I'm trying to teach you by the results of the quizzes and the exams, and that's sufficient for me. Nevertheless, you should always do the exercises, and in many cases you should probably do them more than once to reinforce the ideas. So I don't collect them, but I'm happy to look them over, and I'm always happy to answer any questions you might have along the way. So if you have any questions on any particular exercise that you would like me to consider more, you can always post your questions in the questions forum or send me an email, and I will do my very best to explain the situation and hopefully bring some clarity to it. All right, so on to the exercises.